Hey folks, my name is Jess Tiergan, and this is going to be a brief presentation on the concept of critical thinking in the workplace for the Cognitive and Affective Principles in Psychology class for Aspen University, Module 7. To begin this presentation, I just want to give you folks a brief overview of the 4 topics that I'm going to address in this presentation. The first one is going to be the problem-solving cycle. The second one is going to be some obstacles and aids to problem solving. The third is going to be critical thinking across the lifespan. And the fourth is going to be a brief look at a particular article regarding some new research on creative thinking in the workplace. So let's go ahead and get started. There's a couple different problem solving cycles, and it depends on what research that you're looking at. And you can see the attachment that I included with this presentation to see my citations, so you can see where this research came from. But one of the problem-solving cycles involves these steps. The first step is to clarify and identify the problem. And some would argue that this might be the most important step. And the reason why this can be the most important step is if we don't have a clear idea as to what the problem is, as well as a very clear idea as to what the problem is not, we're going to have a really hard time actually nailing down how to solve the problem. It could mean that we have an answer to solve the problem that's too broad, or it could mean we have an answer that is not broad enough, or it could mean that we're trying to solve a problem that's not actually the problem that we're looking at. So it's very important to identify what the problem is and then be very specific to clarify what the problem is. The next step is to research the problem. So this gives us an idea as to what is going on with the problem, where it shows up, when it shows up, how it's impacting our systems and our workplaces. Maybe if it's involving certain employees, certain team members, is it involving certain parts of our workflow, etc. The next option is going to be formulating creative challenges. So this is going to be to begin thinking of how we're going to see the problem. So challenging, like, wait a second, what are we doing now? What is not working? What is it about this problem that we are not thinking about in the way that's causing us to continue to repeat this problem? And maybe in this phase, we start to think about like alternative lenses. Like instead of just look at the problem from straight on, maybe we also look at it from a 90-degree angle, from up top, from underneath, like all these different views and ways we can consider this problem. After we have a really clear idea as to what is going on and some of the creative challenges that are going on with this problem, then we can start generating ideas. So we can do this ideally in a team. So this can be a team of 2. And if you only have one person, then a journal and a pencil is an awesome way to start looking at different ideas and different options. But a team is the best way, because then you can start bouncing ideas off of one another, considering different options, throwing out different options, considering the weaknesses and the strengths of them. After you've generated ideas, you can start to combine and evaluate the ideas. See which ideas overlap, which ideas are basically the same idea, but just said a different way. Perhaps look at the ideas and recognize which ideas are actually directly related to the problem that you're trying to solve, which goes back to the importance of clarifying and identifying the problem, and which ideas are ones that maybe aren't quite solutions that will help you solve the problem you're trying to solve. Once you get some ideas that are very accurate and very useful, then you want to start drawing up an action plan. So this is the phase where we take the ideas from a conceptual form and put them into a very practical form and say, how do we implement this? How do we make this work in the real world? How do we make this work in our workplace? Once we have a plan, then the next piece is to do it. At this stage of the cycle, we're implementing the idea. We're putting it into practice. And the reality of this, it's a cycle. It goes in a circle. So we might implement the idea and we're seeing some benefit, we're seeing some things change, and then some more problems are coming up. Excellent. Then we go back to clarifying and identifying what those problems are, researching what the problem is, formulating creative challenges, generating new ideas, combining and evaluating the ideas, drawing up an action plan, and implementing the plan again. So that's a quick overview of the problem-solving cycle and some of the ways that we can implement it effectively in the workplace. So to move on to the next section, we're going to look real quick at some obstacles and aids to problem solving. Some of the biggest obstacles to problem solving are obstacles of our minds. The ways that we think about obstacles, the ways that we think about problems dramatically impact our ability to solve them. Some of these, like if we were to make this idea small, it's mindsets that are fixed or mindsets that are entrenched. If we have a very fixed, as in like not diverse, very small, very set way of viewing something, it's going to be very hard to expand outside of that to consider other ways that we could solve a problem. So if we're used to always, like the most like ridiculous example ever, but if we're used to always seeing a nail and trying to hammer it in, and then suddenly we're hammering and hammering and hammering, and that nail won't go in, and we just get frustrated because we have this fixed mindset. I use this hammer to hammer in this nail. Instead of stopping and going, wait a second, why won't this nail go in? What's going on? And maybe we need to use a screwdriver because maybe it looks like a nail, but maybe it's actually just a little bit different because it's a screwdriver. Or maybe there's cement behind this thing, and so we need a different tool. Maybe we need to take the nail out altogether. A lot of different possibilities, but that requires us to use a way broader mindset. And the more fixed our mindset is, the harder it's going to be to problem solve. And this ties really greatly into another obstacle that frequently comes with problem solving, and that's bias. And our bias is this idea that one way is the best way, or our way is the best way, or maybe even our way is the only way. And anytime we consciously or subconsciously have a bias, it can remove the amount of options that are available to us to problem solve. And when we recognize our bias, we can start to push back and push against it. So we might recognize that our bias is we prefer a hammer. Anything sticking out of the wall, we prefer a hammer. And that's okay. Like that's an okay bias to have. But if we don't recognize that bias as a bias, we might think that that's the best way or the right way. Or if we recognize, hey, this is a bias. It works a lot of times for me, but sometimes it won't. Then we know when we need to set the hammer down and look for something else. Another physiological element that can alter our ability to problem solve is stress. So if our body's in a fight or flight state where we are ready to respond to an immediate threat, our frontal lobe is not functioning in a great place to be ready to problem solve. So we're looking to solve the immediate thing in a state of panic or feeling unsafe, as opposed to being ready to think of new things, diverse things, out of the box solutions, ponder things. We're comfortable with being right or wrong when we're not in a state of stress. And so if we can be in a state of security, it is far easier to problem solve and overcome these obstacles. So a fixed mindset, a form of entrenchment, bias, and stress are some major obstacles that can get in the way of us problem solving. Some aids to those, the first, like we talked about, was having the willingness to have a diverse mindset, the willingness to think outside of the box. And we can do that by having other people on our team that will help challenge us, give us other ideas, other options. When it comes to bias, we can, again, a diverse team will really help with that. Anytime we start using never or always terms, that can be a good cue of like, ooh, I think I'm hitting into my bias, because things are rarely always and never. And also we can actively put things in place to help lower our stress. We can use breathing techniques. We can have an environment that helps support us. We can create a positive work environment where people are willing to take risks and think outside of the box. Moving to the next section, when we're looking at critical thinking across the lifespan, critical thinking is important for every point in the human existence, but it looks different in different spaces. When babies are first born, they're solving problems, but they're not solving problems in a very conscious manner. They're solving problems in a way that's very instinctual. Babies learn that if they cry, their caretakers will come to them and feed them. And if they don't learn that really quick, they're going to starve to death. And so those things are really, really required. But that's a very instinctual, like a very survival type of problem solving. Once they become toddlers, the problem solving becomes a little more intentional and a little more aware. Toddlers wonder how gravity works. They wonder what objects will fit into what shapes. They wonder what happens with liquid when you dump it onto themselves or when you dump it onto somebody else. They find out things like when you hit something into yourself, it hurts. They're perpetually problem solving. They're massive problem solvers at this age. Once children move into the elementary space, or the like childhood space, that space is full of a lot of problem solving, but it becomes a little more cognitive. So they're not doing as much like problem solving in the physical world. They're doing a lot of problem solving in the cognitive world and in the awareness world. When they move out of the elementary stage and into the adolescent stage, a lot of the problem solving becomes very social. So they're trying to define themselves as a human separate from their family. They're trying to decide what they value, what they want in life, what life means to them, how to keep friends, how to keep connection, what words are useful for connecting to people. So that problem solving, that critical thinking becomes a lot about social and connecting socially. Once people become adults, the problem solving kind of ebbs and flows. So there are times in adult life where people can kind of drift. Their career is set, they feel pretty stable, they're just doing the thing. And then maybe they have a new baby. And then the problem solving gets all crazy all over again. Or maybe they get promoted to a manager role, and then that problem solving has to step up again. Maybe they buy a house. Any major changes like that really up that critical thinking and that problem solving role that they have to step into. Once humans get into the older adult stage, in a lot of ways the problem solving decreases. And it's replaced by this idea of experience and maturity. So they are passing on to those that are generations before them the lessons they've learned, the experiences that they've had. And there's less active problem solving that they have to do, but more this like mentoring, this like teaching, this like reminiscing, remembering the things that have come before. And also there can be some really like existential problem solving, like what's the meaning of life? What is the meaning of death? What is valuable in life in these final years? And so some of the practical problem solving skills needs go way down, the critical thinking skills go way down, but the existential, the spiritual, the philosophical elements sometimes go way up during this stage. There can also be cognitive changes that occur during this stage as the brain experiences aging and disease and just suffers from degeneration, as all living things do with enough time. The final thing I want to look at just real quickly here as we end is a little bit of research on creative thinking in the workplace. There is an article that was written about different ways that we can support people in their ability to think creatively and critically in the workplace. And this one article that, like I said, I will include the citation. It's called Work and Energy by Guided Inquiry Worksheets. In this article, they looked at using worksheets to increase people's ability to use critical thinking skills. So they combined art and creativity in these visual worksheets as a way to build up these skills. And so they were able to teach the skills without people having to actually risk them in the real world. And using these different like creative formats, these different like concept maps, and these different activities on these sheets, they were able to help people build up these thinking skills. And it's a cool option because it allows us to understand other ways that we can mimic or we can create like a virtual reality basically, and teach people these skills through virtual reality. And that's another interesting thing to note as there is more and more research being done on the use of virtual reality in the way people think, and in teaching people a way to think and teaching people a way to respond and altering the way people's minds map out options. And the nice thing about virtual options, whether they be in the form of these worksheets like the article says or in like virtual reality systems, is we can provide rewards for folks that their brain experiences as rewards that don't require the risk that those types of rewards might require in the real world. And so the virtual options and the options through formulated environments are exciting, exciting new forefronts of what's possible to help support people in creative and critical thinking in the times to come. Thank you so much for listening to this message. I greatly appreciate your time and attention, and I hope that you all have an excellent day.